There's a place where men come when the framework they were handed stops working, when the performance gets tired, when the provision isn't enough, when the man on the outside doesn't match the man on the inside. This is that place. Conversations from the Cave, a space where men come to be forged, formed, and realigned on fulfilling their mission in business, in marriage, and in life. I'm Bo Powell, and this is your Cave. Last week we established something. The cave isn't where you go to hide, it's where you go to be built. But before we can understand what got distorted, we have to go back to the original. What did God actually design before anything else got to it? Before the culture got to it, before religion reduced it, and before performance replaced it? This is episode 2, the original design. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the Cave. Last episode was the official launch to season 1, with that first episode being The Cave is the point. And as I began to reflect back on that episode, I even went back and listened to it, I realized that I was describing what this show was supposed to be, but I was doing it from a distance. I talked about even in that episode about that I built this show because I needed it first, yet I was describing everybody else, but didn't really describe me. So I wanted to take the opportunity in episode 2, before we really go into what the original design is, to help you understand why this show was really created. I'm a seasoned gentleman, as you can probably tell by the gray hair if you're watching on YouTube. And about 6 years ago, I left corporate America. I left a 6-figure job to begin building a financial coaching business. At the time, I was teaching in the School of Ministry at one of the largest ministries in the country, very well known. And I was also doing some coaching and counseling of couples on the side. And I found myself after a pretty successful launch of business and really catching my stride in coaching and getting great at coaching men and couples, I found myself in a pretty tough season. I had just gotten out of a 2-year relationship that I thought was going to be the relationship. And I was immediately thrust into a caregiving role for an aging mother who eventually became non-ambulatory. And after about a year, we got her back to a place to where she was ambulatory. She was moving around, pretty much independent, could take care of herself. And I'm thinking, God, man, I'm glad mom's okay. My assignment is up and I can get back to building my business, doing ministry and so forth. I'm thinking I'm out of this cave season. Only for a few months later for mom to fall and break her hip, and who is now back non-ambulatory. Now, anybody who's built a business or is in the middle of building a business understand how much it takes to not just build a business, but to sustain a business and to scale a business. It takes everything you got just to get the thing off the ground. And as a man, we embrace that. We understand responsibility. We welcome the weight and the pressure. You with me? We're men. That's what we do. But many of us, we've built our identity on the opinion that our role is solely to protect, provide, and lead, right? And when you find yourself in a cave season where you're now restricted and don't have the freedom to go out and provide the way you want to protect in ways you feel are adequate and to be able to lead in the ways you've envisioned, it begins to mess with you. And I found myself in that season, I'm questioning God, like, God, is this it? Is this all you have for me? I was just getting things going, and I'm supposed to be wealthy. Now you've got me here in this restricted place. But I didn't realize that God was going to use this place to begin to reorient me to the original design he had created us for. Because every man in here understands responsibility. And every man in here also understands the weight and the pressure and the stress of responsibility. And when we find ourselves in places where we can't operate in the ways that allow us to fulfill that responsibility in ways we deem fit, many of us begin to question things. We question God. We question the system. And ultimately, we begin to question our identity as men. We've heard the stories of how many of our men have lost their lives early, whether it was to stress-related death or whether it was suicide, because their identity was so tied up in their ability to produce and to perform. And when that got interrupted, the additional weight of expectation took them out. And I realized that even in that last episode, I was operating according to that framework.
That framework that adds unnecessary pressure to perform, to produce, to try to show up to make it seem like you've got it all together, right? So, I'm pushing this show out, describing something, but not totally being transparent with it. So I wanted to start this show to help you understand that caves will happen in life. But caves don't happen to punish us, and caves are not anything that we need to run or hide from. Because caves are a place that God will often place us to form us, to shape us, to realign us to ultimately what He's calling us to be. Because I know this to be true because there I was in a place with this tremendous expectation to be a man, go make the money. You got to go build. You got to go conquer, and here I am at this stage in my life taking care of my mother, which is a very honorable place to be. But I'm like, this ain't what a man's supposed to be doing, right? So I'm living with this tension because I knew I heard God telling me to leave corporate America. And I was like, Lord, I know what you said. I waited until you told me to leave. I had spiritual counsel. I had business counsel. I mean, I had things all set up. And I got out here building and navigating the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. You know what I'm saying? And, I get to this place where I've got this faith thing figured out and I've got this confidence knowing I can really go out and build this thing. And just as things were coming to a head, God thrust me deeper into this role and it's messing with me. Now, anyone who's taken on the role of caregiving understands the weight of it. You understand the tremendous sacrifice and adjustment it requires. And though it may be honorable, the frustration, you understand, the frustration that can come with it. And then I remember the physical therapists and the nurses and the medical staff and whatnot, they would often say, we don't usually see men doing these things. And I got to tell you, on one hand, I was a little bit proud. But a greater part of me was feeling some type of way because I was like, oh, so I'm doing a woman's job. Huh? But what I needed to get was a revelation of what God originally designed. Not what the church or the culture said, but what God actually said before this distortion got a hold of it. Now, I want to share something with you because even before God had taken me on this journey to really begin to understand manhood and masculinity, and not just manhood and masculinity, but an even greater understanding of the woman and the male-female dynamic. Before I got here, he was prepping me. He was prepping me that he was going to be revealing some things to me in this season. And I remember last year at the beginning of the year, one of the things I felt like God was telling me, and I know this to be true now, he was telling me that he was going to take me from faith to trust. And that's a big leap because, we all operate by faith, but sometimes it's difficult to let go. I mean, it gets really tough to take your hands off of it and let God carry the weight. You know what I'm saying? But all this time, God had been doing some things in me, but I had been so caught up because I'm thinking like, man, I'm running out of time. I only got so much time left. I got to get these things built because I'm thinking legacy because I got kids and grandkids. And all of a sudden I found myself not just in this place, but when I was supposed to be getting out of this place, I'm thrust back into it. And so I said, I'm going crazy because every part of me feels like I need to be out here building, right? Making it happen. I got my friends winning in business. We're having great conversation about all the great things are happening. And I'm like, But one of the things I've learned in this season is what I'm going to be talking with you about today. Because despite some of the challenges of being in this caregiving role, God has taken me to a place to where I totally trust him, right? I mean, he sustained me this whole time. In fact, I've had some of my best months in business during this season. There was just something I needed to get before God was truly going to let me out of this cave. And I needed to become something new. And that's really what the cave is all about. And that's why this show was birthed. Now, I know the last episode we talked about Zakar, which means you were created to remember what God said and anchor it in the earth. And we also talked about Salem, meaning that you are God's royal representative. And we talked about Demut, meaning we need to operate according to God's likeness. Okay. Now, we're not going to rehash those things, but I do want to remind you that you being created in the image of God Nobody could change that. That is absolutely unbreakable, and there is nothing that anybody can say or do that would change the fact that you were made in God's image. That's value right there, bro. But the distortion came when it comes to us operating according to God's likeness. And many of us are operating in many ways according to a post-fall narrative. Now, you may be saying, well, providing and protecting, that is of God. And I would say, absolutely. But it was never designed to solely define your manhood and your identity. So this particular episode, we're going to talk about God's original design, because I had to look at what work really meant when God said he put Adam in the garden to work it and to keep it. And as I began to study, I realized that God didn't place Adam in the garden and say, Adam, hey, go build something, bro. No, he placed him in a garden that was already built. It was already functioning. It was already flourishing. And he told Adam one thing: work it and keep it. Now, most of us heard that and built the provide and protect narrative around that. Go out and make something happen. You got to go build. You got to conquer. You got to produce. And those are definitely fruit of an aligned man, right? So we're not saying or speaking against provide and protect. Okay. I just want you to understand that, but that is not what work and keep means. You see, Adam didn't plant a thing in that garden, at least initially, right? So he didn't have to figure out how to make it produce because God had already did that. Adam's assignment was different. You see, he was placed into something already functioning, and he was told to tend it, to guard it, and to maintain it. Now, for me, that described stewardship, not being the source. And the moment you understand that, the moment you realize you're not supposed to be the source of everything shifts. Now, I know that many of you listening, you understand consciously that God is the source and we are stewards. But what I found is that many of us don't understand it functionally. Otherwise, we wouldn't be questioning our manhood when things don't go as planned. Or we wouldn't find ourselves in great careers that reward us financially, but they leave us depleted spiritually and emotionally. You see, we've been taught, or at least we've accepted, that our work is an act of worthship to show how valuable we are. And yes, we are supposed to bring value as the fruit of who we are, right? However, God's original intent was for our work to be an act of worship. You see, the Hebrew word for work in Genesis 2 is avad, which also described priestly service, not clock-in labor. Okay? So instead of separating our work from our worship, God is saying your work is part of your worship. You see, you must remember that you are Salem, his royal representative. So your work is for you to glorify God and advance his agenda, which ultimately means you being his representative means God is responsible for your provision. That was the garden. And from there, you're responsible for the proper stewarding of that provision to ensure you and your family have the sustenance they need for life. So let me make this practical for you. Because some of you, your career is your calling. Your business is the mission. God has specifically assigned you to that field, that pulpit, that platform. Okay? If that's you, you already know this because you have a clarity and you have a peace that lies underneath that grind that you have that confirms what I'm talking about. But I'm willing to bet that for the majority of men listening, and many of the men that they know, that your job is not your purpose and your business or career is not your calling. They may very well be your garden. That place that God has you right now, whether that's a cubicle, a job site, a classroom, a sales floor, or a boardroom, that may very well be the base camp that God is using to sustain you so you can go fulfill the mission he actually called you to. Now, that doesn't mean you go quit your job to walk in purpose. God forbid that. You don't have to choose between the provision and the calling. But what you do have to do is stop letting the base camp become the destination. Because the moment your job becomes the mission instead of the means, You'll spend your whole life defending a perimeter God only assigned you to pass through. He said to work it and to keep it, but never confuse it for what you were actually built for. You see, if you really want to get down to it, God's mandate in Genesis 1 to the man and the woman was to be fruitful, multiply, replenish, subdue, and have dominion. Now, those are reproductive in military terms, and the reproductive terms come with the idea of expanding presence and influence and a complete occupation of a territory. So ultimately, God didn't place man in the earth to be a gardener, per se. He placed man in the earth to be a governor, to be a light that overcame the darkness. You see? So he placed man here to establish the earth as God's territory, as his territory, and to bring it all under his authority and to keep it under his authority. Now, let me just take a pause right here, because this is not talking about war and death in the physical. All right. This was never a call to conquest over people. It was a call to take dominion over darkness. So God wasn't commissioning an army to go occupy territory by force. He was commissioning his image bearers to displace darkness with presence. So everywhere a man walking in his original design showed up meant chaos had to yield. Not because of the man's strength, but because of whose image he carried. And the enemy of that mission was never other people. It was always the darkness trying to corrupt the image. Okay, you hear what I'm saying? So God didn't give Adam a garden to go bring glory to the work of his hands. He gave him a garden to provide sustenance to his family, him and his family, so they can go out and fulfill the mission that God had gave him. So the garden wasn't the point. The mission was the point, but it was the garden that made the mission possible. Right? Now, and then he told Adam to keep it. And the Hebrew word for keep is shamar, and it means to guard what's sacred. Now, most people hear that and go straight to physical protection. And yes, that is part of it. But shamar goes deeper than that. It means guarding your assignment with character and integrity. It means guarding your relationships mentally and emotionally. It means guarding your position when even nobody's even watching. It means guarding your words when you're frustrated, guarding your mind from what you consume. It means guarding your peace from what you permit, guarding your marriage, guarding your family, right? It means all those things. And as I dug deeper, I realized that guarding wasn't just about guarding the garden itself. It was about guarding a position, a sacred post that was the source of life for the mission. And it also meant guarding a covenantal position or alliance, which we're going to talk about that more as the season progresses. So I want you to understand, you can be providing all day long, but if you're not present in your marriage, it's left vulnerable. You can make all the money to make sure the security system is always online. But if you're at home, but your mind is still at work, you're out of position. You can provide the best top technology, make sure they have the best internet, but if you're not managing what your children are exposed to online and on TV, you're not fulfilling the Shamar mandate. You can be faithful in the church house, but if you're bringing unresolved angers through the front door every evening, you're guarding the wrong perimeter. You can be there physically, but if your emotional walls are so high that nobody can actually reach you, your presence isn't protection, my friend. It's just proximity. And we're really going to start to dig into this more in episode 3. But what I'm trying to tell you is this. God's idea of working and guarding was about maintaining a position and a posture more than it was about a paycheck and a punch. You see, there's a darkness we all know exists in this world. And if all you're doing is chasing a paycheck, you'll miss out on purpose. And you may even become part of the problem. Because the moment your identity is rooted in what you can do, you'll compromise your position to protect your production every single time. Now, I want to change gears here because this next point is wreaking havoc in men and women when it comes to the distortion. And this is the idea of rest. I've heard it over and over again. People saying things like, I'll rest when I'm dead, or man, you can't sleep 8 hours and still be successful. And we celebrate it because somewhere along the way, we built a culture that confused unnecessary sacrifice with significance. What do I mean? Well, we've been taught if you sacrifice your sleep, that's hustle. If you're sacrificing your health, that's dedication. If you sacrifice your family, that's just the cost of success. But sacrifice your income to protect your peace or your people, now you've got a problem. Now they've got questions about your ambition. Now, we understand that sacrifice is part of the faith walk and it's part of success. But it was never God's intent for you to sacrifice your rest. He never intended for you to take on the identity of source. Now, understand this is more than about getting some sleep. This is about you surrendering that exhausting position of trying to be the source of everything. Because here's what I want you to know. You were never designed to be God. You were just designed to look like him. And there's a difference between bearing his image and carrying his weight. Now, when you read Genesis 2, right? When I read that, I realized that Adam's first full day in the earth was on the Sabbath. That was the day God designed for rest. So Adam didn't earn rest. He started in it. And most men and a lot of women are trying to rest their way through exhaustion toward worth, which is backwards. See, you were built to operate from rest, not toward it. Now, what does that mean practically? It means when you understand that God is the source, you stop striving to produce your way into significance. It means you start operating from a place of security instead of scarcity. And it means you accept that God is responsible for the provision for the mission. If he called you to it, he's already funding it. So that doesn't mean you stop working, but it does mean you stop worrying. Okay? It means you can do what's in your hand today and trust that God is working on tomorrow while you sleep. See, it means you can take some time off without feeling guilty. It means you can take some time to meditate and pray. It means you can be present and notice that friend who's still smiling, but their behavior is off, and God may use you to pull him out of that dark place. See, this is not about being passive. It's about having faith with your eyes open. Okay? Because what I found is that there are two traps that pull men away from that rest and from away from their post. The first one is what I call the productivity trap. And what that sounds like is this. It says your value is in your output and your worth is in your work. It tells us that if you produce today, that means you mattered. But if you didn't, you're falling behind. So if you're not grinding, somebody else is. And it creates this anxiety that you can't shake. That's not ambition, right? And we celebrate it. We even put it on t-shirts. We'll put it in our Instagram bio, but it was never God's design for man to measure his worth by what he produced today. See, the second trap is performance identity. And it's sneaky because it looks like strength. It says you became whoever the room needed you to be, whether that's being strong for your family or confident for your team or unbothered for your boys, spiritual for the church, whatever that may be. See, you've been playing a different role in every room you walked in for so long, you don't even know which one is actually you anymore. And one day you strip away the titles, you strip away the roles, and you take away the applause, and there's a silence where your identity was supposed to be. And that right there is a man who never learned to operate from rest. That right there is a man who's still trying to earn what God has already given him. And I need you to hear me on this. A lot of men have lost their lives and their souls trying to be something they were never created to be and doing things that they were never designed to do under the guise of you can be whatever you put your mind to. And here's the thing. Maybe you can. Maybe you'll get everything you decided you wanted. But if you strip away the roles, the titles, the money, and the attention, and there's still a void that church can't fill and relationships can't touch, God is speaking to you in that void. And I want you to know that emptiness doesn't mean you're broken. It's an invitation. But the challenge is somewhere along the way, we've been taught that it's weak to feel. So we shut that part down, and we've accepted that it's part of just being a man. So we don't take the time to even sit and explore what that feeling means and what that void is trying to say to us. But here's the thing. The feelings don't go away. They just go underground until we're triggered, and we either explode on those around us or we shut them all out, which I call emotional shutdown. Our significant others see and feel it. Our children see and feel it. Even our closest friends may see and feel it, right? But because we've buried it so deep, we miss it until it surfaces and becomes destructive. The bottom line is, God never designed you to be defined so narrowly. And he never intended for you to build your identity on something that couldn't hold the weight of who you are. You are Zakar, the one called to remember what God said and anchor it in the earth. You're the one called to work and to keep what God created in order to have what's necessary to fulfill the mission. But a long time ago, it got distorted. And we're going to delve deeper into that in episode 3, because you need to know what happened. We need to know how the man in his perfect state with so much clarity laid the foundation for everything that followed. Now, before I close, I want to say something to the woman who's found this show, because we cannot talk about the distortion without talking about you. Not because you caused it, but because you were there. And what happened in that garden affected you as deeply as it affected him. And we're going to get there. And episode 5 is totally about you. But first, we need to understand what actually happened. So tune in next week to understand how the distortion happened, so we can begin the journey back home to God's original